Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Chasing Dreams podcast with Charlie and Justin. We are on episode 141. We're recording midday on a beautiful Saturday, and I kind of feel like we have to be at that point where we're slowly starting to count down the number of Saturdays that we have with this beautiful weather, unfortunately.
Yeah, I dread talking about the other seasons.
Well, there's a lot that's about to be put on my plate now, especially because school's going back soon, relatively soon. People keep asking me what day we go back, and truthfully, the past couple of times I haven't known. One person who asked, it was for a meeting purpose, so I had to actually look and see how far away it is. But we are now officially under a month left until school starts, which is kind of mind blowing because the summer is always that period that goes so fast for me and for everybody else for that matter. But it's certainly for me too when it's like I have a break from a particular occupation that occupies so much of my time. It's crazy to think that we're going back so soon now.
Yeah, I don't know that I can like a lot like the normal everyday Joe can like fathom what your guys' like world is like to be adults and get the summers off. I know you don't get the summer off, but a lot of teachers, don't do anything when they're off, right?
Yep. I think that's like an interesting talking point for people when it comes to when they like talk about teacher salaries and stuff like that. Like I have that conversation pretty often where people say about teachers don't get paid enough, which that's usually the contingency that says that is typically teachers, of course. And then,
No, I agree though.
there's a lot of people that will say that as well. And I actually like to play devil's advocate a little bit, even as a teacher, because there are like innumerable benefits to being a teacher that when you look at the pay, you can kind of make an argument that the pay is what it should be because you have to remember like the benefits are pretty good, obviously. That's a portion of it that's, accounted for. And then you think you don't work holidays, you don't work weekends, there's no necessary overtime, at least that's required by administration. So you can obviously teachers do a lot of work outside of school, but you don't have to if that's your teaching style and you don't have a lot of papers to grade. And I mean, that's kind of a false reality, I guess, for most teachers. But technically, if you didn't want to do work outside of school, you didn't have to. So you don't work holidays, you don't work weekends, you don't work overtimes. You get the summer off. You're probably one of the only professions that I can think of that gets canceled due to inclement weather, even though you're in a climate controlled setting, you're indoors. So there are definitely a lot of benefits. The one thing that's tough about teaching, though, dude, is the fact that at least this is just my 2 cents, is that there's no opportunity for advancements financially aside from longevity. So, like,
right, you don't get compensated for more education.
Correct. Like you could go up but you could get out of teaching. So if I wanted to go like the administrative route, if I wanted to be like an assistant principal or a principal or superintendent or an athletic director or a special education director or something like that, there's other hats that you can put on and get compensated for it appropriately. But if you want to just stick in teaching and do education, the only way that you can go up in the pay scale is just longevity, just last longer and keep teaching, which is a good thing, but it's also a bad thing because like for me, I don't know, like with what the nature of what I do, and you're kind of the same way, where just being interested in fitness in general, like health and fitness tends to be problem solution and results driven. So I have a
Right.
problem, I need to fix it, and then results driven. So I want to get certain results, and like obviously there's some outliers, but normally there's a pretty stark correlation between the amount of time I spend in the gym and the results I get. If you exercise a lot, you get good results. If you don't, you don't. If you eat well most of the time, you'll get good results most of the time. If you eat poorly most of the time, you'll get bad results most of the time or whatever. And I feel like teaching is like outside of that paradigm. Like it doesn't matter how good of a teacher I am necessarily in terms of financial like reciprocation. It's just I just have to last longer because hypothetically I could have a teacher that has been teaching 20 years than me and could be a horrible teacher and they could make go ahead.
I was getting ready to say that like it doesn't as long as you check the box and this is not being disrespectful, right? But as long as you check the box as a teacher, you're getting paid. So
Yes.
what is driving teachers to be extraordinary? That's the reason why America, for lack of better words, is the dumbest nation on the planet.
Yeah, and I think that
where kids just aren't learning enough because teachers don't care. Not that some teachers do. Like, we're talking to one that cares more than most that I know, but as a whole, they're not. They have nothing to strive for. So why?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's just it. Is it elicits complacency on our end a lot of times, because I've actually had that discussion with teachers, several teachers before, where you get worked up about certain things, and that's kind of actually, unfortunately, that's one of the best pieces of advice that I've gotten as a teacher, and it actually kind of pains me to say this a little bit, but one of the best pieces of advice that I've gotten is you can't let your heart kind of overwhelm you. Like, you can't care too much, and one of the one of the supportive pillars of that argument is you're going to get paid the same either way. Which is
Yeah,
not
if you
really,
work
it's,
100 hours. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I keep
no, no,
interrupting you.
no, you're right. If you work, like you
You,
were going to say, if you work 100 hours, you're going to get paid the same as someone who works, the normal 8-hour day a week that they're allocated, or 7-hour week, or whatever.
right.
Yeah, it's
That's
just,
frustrating.
and
I
I
can
don't
only
really know any
imagine.
ways to fix it, honestly. I talked to a college professor one time. Her name was Professor Sedzo. She was one of my math professors, and her and I had this long kind of decorated discussion about education and what needs fixed. And once she found out I was an education major, she like picked my brain a little bit about, some of my motives. And one of the things that she proposed is giving teachers an outrageously high salary. And one of the reasons for that was just instilling a sense of competitiveness within the field. So
Right.
if you're really intelligent and you come from a very high to do, well off, affluent family, there's kind of like a certain amount of occupations that are grouped into this little category of things that you're assumed to do. So if I come from a really good family and I'm really smart, I'm kind of like almost responsible to, it's like my responsibility to become a doctor, become a lawyer, or anything in the health field, something with being going to law school, whatever. There's like, a select few things that you're supposed to do in a sense. Whereas with education, that doesn't seem to be the case. Where when you think about it fundamentally, and there's a lot wrong with public school system, trust me, you're preaching to the choir on this one. But one of the problems, foundationally speaking, with education, in my opinion, is we don't have our brightest minds being educators, because it's a very low barrier of entry, so to speak. Like, it's not difficult to get a degree and become a teacher. And then there's also not a ton of pay for someone who has an extreme amount of capabilities to go elsewhere. So if I'm highly intelligent and I have the ability to do something that's a lot higher paying than a teacher, then I'm going to go that route. Now, it may take longer schooling, it may put me in debt further, or it may be physically like a little bit more labor intensive or more stressful or whatever, but I can get compensated um, equally to what I'm putting out. Whereas with education, you're kind of stuck in a sense, and every year your salary goes up. But again, like we spoke about, that's just on longevity. So one of her things was make teachers the highest paid profession around, because what that would do, again, would instill some competitiveness, where the brightest minds would all fight, in a sense, for limited teaching spots. They would fight to get into education programs, and that would allow the institutions to be highly selective with who they bring in. I don't have to just bring in someone who has an education degree, because we have a tough time finding teachers. I could bring in, 10 candidates for a super competitive interview that are all 4.0 students, all like have a ton of college accolades, a very, very good job resume if they're teachers coming from another school district or whatever. So it makes the whole field accelerate that much more if you allocate the funds. But like I said, a lot of people are going to be hesitant to get into education just because of the framework of education in the public setting as it is right now. And then certainly the pay reflects that too. So I think that's one of the things that
So
you could possibly do.
you talked about the pay and the pay structure in the public sector, right?
Mhm.
What does it look like in the private sector? So from private schools where every student's paying a tuition, is the pay better or more competitive for teachers? Is it like on a clinical ladder setting, or is it still longevity based, or
Um,
do teachers get paid for performance of their students?
so there's, I'll first say I don't know broad spectrum. I can only tell you about like the certain instances that I'm familiar with, like based on my experience. So, because I went to a private school up until eighth grade, I went to a Catholic school, and then after eighth grade, there was a lot of private schools that feasibly I could have gone to, but they were all about 45 minutes away, which with me playing multiple sports and my brother playing multiple sports and both my family, both my mom and my dad working full time, it wasn't really feasible to be able to do that, especially because my brother and I played different sports, so we wouldn't even be on the same schedule. Um,
Right.
so I went up to a private school up until eighth grade. And I know for a fact that the teachers were not paid very well. When I got out of college, or excuse me, when I was in college and I did a teaching experience, like a field experience, like a practicum, I was under a cooperating teacher at a school called Our Lady of Peace. And um, that teacher was getting out of teaching in that school district. He was younger at the time. He's probably in his late 20s, and he said that he was getting out of the school district. And I said, why? It's an awesome school district. You have like great kids, good community support. Like the facilities aren't bad for a small private school. Like you have small classroom size, so you only have about 20 per class. Like it's a really, really great setup for you. And his issue was that I think he had one kid and another on the way. So essentially had like two kids and his wife. And he said, I'm trying to do this on like a $19,000 a year salary. So for all intents and purposes, you could say he was getting paid pennies for the work he was doing. And I know that a
Right.
lot of private schools are like that, just because with limited, or if any, I don't really know how the public funding works in a private institution if they get any, but the cost of tuition is not enough to meet the like a full time salary for all the teachers and stuff. So they don't get paid much at all, unless I'm sure there are some instances where private schools pay a lot more, but I feel like that's like a case by case thing, and it's probably rare to get into those places, I would think. Although I'm not entirely sure. That's a good question, though.
Yeah, I just wonder, because if that was the case, then teachers should all just go work for private schools. I just what's the benefit? I mean, I'm looking at it from like a risk to reward thing. What is the benefit for a teacher to go to a private school where they are held to a higher standard if they're not going to be compensated accordingly?
Yeah. Well, there's a little bit of like accountability in a sense in terms of teacher performance. So like we take the state tests at the end of the year in Ohio, and most states have a state testing system where the kids take a test, the results get published, and the teachers are kind of rated based on kid performance. Well, there's a few, those things are very nuanced because first and foremost, you're going to have corruption wherever there's performance indicators. So teachers could, somehow cheat on the test or coerce the kids to provide the right answer, even though technically we're not allowed to talk outside of like the script that we're allowed to prompt. And like the dialogue that we have to have, we can't answer any questions or whatever. But I'm sure that that happens anytime there's performance indicators, especially if there was pay at stake, right? So if you paid teachers more based on
Right.
child performance, then they would obviously, there'd probably be some corruption there. Well, and then the other thing too is if you go based on child performance, there would be some wrenches thrown in for someone who like teaches in special education like myself. So people would
Right.
be, I'm sure teachers would vie over higher functioning students with the higher academic performances because those kids are more likely to pass and more likely to excel versus some students with learning disabilities that I predominantly work with that may struggle on the test a little bit more, obviously. So we have those tests that teacher performance indicators on them, but it's not really, I don't want to say it's wasteful, but it's not used for anything tangible. They just use that to kind of like say, hey, you were ineffective, you were skilled, you were proficient, you were whatever category you fall in as a teacher. So admin kind of will hold that over your head a little bit, but realistically, I don't think it's going to have any negative or positive impact on your teaching career that you would really notice regardless.
Right.
So it's definitely the
Yeah, I
education
mean,
world is definitely interesting, man.
yeah, and I think teachers are taken for granted, by the general population because, coming from a parent with one child, it's tough. Put 20 kids in the same room and you have to corral them all day and educate them on top of that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm in the same boat with your college professor you were talking to. I think teachers are among who should be uh, teachers should be among the highest paid in society. Right next to police officers and firefighters and nurses. You know, people that are selfless and doing the right thing, and educators. Like, it's unbelievable to me when I learned of what a teacher's like base rate starting salaries are in my area.
Nah.
It's terrible.
Yep.
To me, it's honestly, it's terrible because, as a parent, I expect the teachers that my child is going to have to give their 100%. But I'm also the type of person that I agree that you should be compensated for giving your 100%.
Yep.
Like, they are your kids while they're there. My children are your children because you're in control.
Well,
And
it's like
that's
we
how I
touched
feel like.
about briefly when we started this conversation is how can you incentivize someone to work hard and give their best effort if they're going to get paid the same way, like regardless. And I know that there's moral and ethical people that are going to give their best regardless. There's some people that are built that way just because they can't give anything less than their best on any task, regardless of what it is. And then, of course, you have, a huge number of teachers that do it because that's the humanitarian thing to do. And they have a lot of pride in
Yeah.
their job
Well,
educating kids, and they're going to do the best they can for the kids regardless. But I think that it's just human nature. It's like everything we do is risk reward as a human being. Like we do things for reward, even if it's sensational. Like we do things because like we have attraction to people to procreate. We eat because we want the feeling of fulfillment, of satiation. Um, that way we don't die. It's kind of like we're constantly seeking just like dopamine response from video games or from social media or whatever. So I think it's human nature to want to feel compensated and get rewards for what they're doing. But it's very hard to get people to give a true 100% if they're not being compensated for it.
right. I agree. I
Yeah.
agree. It's basically the system taking advantage of people. Like,
Yep.
teachers are being taken advantage of because they're expected. You're expected to succeed. You're expected to excel, and you're expected to pour it into every child and listen to the heartbreaking stories.
And one of the things that's
But you're
important
not.
too, though, to go counterpoint to that is that sure, everything you're saying has validity, and you can make an argument that teachers get paid enough. You could make an argument that teachers get paid too much, and you can certainly make an argument that teachers don't get paid nearly what they should. But regardless of where you're at on that scale, I think it's sufficient to say that everybody knows what the expectation is in terms of getting into the profession. So if you don't like the pay of a teacher, don't get an
Don't
education.
do
Like
it.
I knew the pay cut that I was likely to take when I changed majors into education, and I knew what I was getting myself into. Now, I also knew that weekends off, holidays off, summers off in a set day schedule, like a set time shift, allowed me to have advancements elsewhere professionally and would allow me to pursue other things that I wanted to do, which is something that made teaching attractive. In this instance, it's turned into like training and my online company and doing everything that I do in the fitness and health and performance fields. So I knew that going in. Yeah, I may not get paid a lot for teaching, but it's going to afford me the opportunity to kind of expand myself elsewhere. So I knew that going in. So I think that that's kind of the bottom line with all that stuff is you got to be able to make sure that going in what you're getting into. And me, man, my stance on stuff is I never complain about situations that I put myself in or things that are in my control.
I agree.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
and
this
I don't
is
think
something that's
that's And I think that's the cool thing about like talking about this to you. I've never ever once heard you complain about your job, what your pay is, none of that. Like, you signed up for it. And I know from everything that I know about you that you are one of the outliers that does all the extra things. And it doesn't matter because that's what you're supposed to do. But I just think, I think we would get more Charlies if we would compensate the education system more appropriately.
Well, I appreciate that a lot. But then, the other thing that's important is like when people do the opposite. So we could talk about how teachers don't get paid a lot, but there's a lot of people that think they get paid too much and think that teaching's the easiest job in the world. Like I've had some of my friends that say, "Oh, you're so lucky." Now, not that I get summers off, because as well as anybody that I work more during the summers because I'm constantly at the gym from sunrise to sunset almost every day, it seems like. And then plus, obviously, running my own online business
Right.
is time staking in itself. But they say you're so lucky because you could have summers off if you wanted. The teachers are so lucky. It's, you guys are indoors, you get to work with kids all day. You don't have to do shift work. It's not labor intensive. It's not required like a lot of physical effort. You have a set schedule all the time. You get, like we said a million times, you get the weekends off and holidays and blah, blah, blah. And I always tell people, it's just like me. If I was to complain about being in education, I have the power to get out of it. I can just leave education and not do it anymore
Right.
and pursue a career elsewhere. So that's one of the reasons why I don't complain about it. But there's the opposite too, dude, where people complain about how awesome of a gig teaching is, and teachers shouldn't complain about their salary because it's so easy and et cetera, which I would probably argue that in terms of the easiness, obviously emotionally and mentally more difficult than physically difficult, but regardless. And I tell people, and this isn't me being combative, I mean this genuinely, like if you think that education's so great, then what's stopping you from doing it? Like if you're so jealous
Right.
that teachers get summers off and you're so jealous that they get to work with kids and you're so just go get your education degree. Like or just become a substitute. The requirements to be a substitute are very, very minimal in a lot of school districts because most school districts are hurting for subs. Go do it if you'd like. But I would say that to anybody in any profession whatsoever. If you don't like the position,
Right.
go do something else. Like I've never been one to complain. Like I said, I've never been one to complain about things that are in my control. So they may upset me, but I'm not going to make that somebody else's problem. Like if I'm overweight and I want to
Yeah.
lose weight, I'm not going to complain to other people that I can't
We,
lose weight because that's my control and I'm not going to throw that on them.
right.
And I
It's
think
all
that
about the
like,
choices we make.
yeah, absolutely. So if you choose a certain profession and you don't like it, go make a change. Or if you see someone that's in a position that you're not in, like you can do that because I think you just have to weigh the pros and the cons. Like I could look at your job and say, "Wow, Justin, your like safety management or whatever term or phrase that you would coin what you do, your position versus my teaching salary, you make a ton more money." I could say, "Well, Justin, you're so lucky. You're so lucky. You make all this money." But then when I boil it down to being on call and needing to work in the middle of the night and constantly driving and not having a predictable family schedule because you're constantly going to work at crazy hours and you can work essentially multiple shifts in a row, like all then suddenly that extra salary doesn't seem too attractive, right? So I think that some people, what they do is when it comes to just the professions in general, I think one of the things they do is they look at the pros of everybody else's position instead of the cons of everybody else's position. So they look at all the things that suck about their job and they look at all the good things about everybody else's job.
Right. I think as a society we do that. Like, as a whole, society is really good at looking at the positives and not recognizing what the hardships are, the negatives of other people's situations.
You know what
And
facilitates that the most and is the absolute worst for that?
social media.
Boom, 100%.
Yep.
Because
Because you don't
everybody
see people
controls the
putting their
narrative.
failures on.
Yeah. Yeah, everybody's going to
Yeah.
put out there what they want to put out there, which like I do that too. Like if I take a set of pictures, like I'm not going to post the pictures that I look the worst in. I'm going to post the pictures that I look in the best in, which is fine, but you have to look at it with context. Like when someone posts videos or pictures or whatever, or they post like the vacations they go on or all the good stuff, you're getting a very, very fine-tooth comb that's acting as a filter for everything that person wants you to hear or wants you to see. So they're only posting things that they want you to see in terms of subject, but then they're also posting. So like, I only want you to see the good things like me going to the gym. And then within that paradigm, it's even more specific because not only do I just want to show you the in the gym stuff, but I want to show you the good stuff that I excel at the most in the gym. So it's
Yeah.
kind of like hyper.
You don't see too many people posting videos of their squat.
Yeah. Yes.
You know, I mean, I'm just using that as a, you know, because it's my weakest area. But, you know, and I think that's, you know, the irony in that is that's why I like to use this platform, our podcast, as the storyteller for my weight loss journey. Because I used it and I decided when we started talking about my story on here that I wasn't going to just do the positives, the good shit stuff. You know, I wasn't going to just talk about, you know, how much weight I've lost or how great I've done. I've been open. I've been honest about, well, recently it's not so great. You know, I got to work on it. I got to figure it out. I got to, you know, whatever the emotion is or the timeline is, because it's kind of like trying to break that cycle of using a social media. Cause that's basically, essentially, this is kind of like a social platform. Right.
Yep.
And, you know, not using this as just showing our positives. I like to show the negative. I like to show my own personal failures because A, it holds me accountable, and B, it's, you know, real. It's raw. It's not fake. It's not, you know, scripted or fine tooth combed.
Yeah, it gives you a sense of relatability, I think, because when people like dude, I'll never forget this. For some reason, this has resonated with me so much. There was, gosh, probably over a year ago now. It was a long time ago. We were recording an episode, and because in the past we had like, especially when we were early on, you and I had some dialogue about sharing like feedback, like things people said to us about the episode and what they thought about it. And I remember specifically that someone said to you about one of the episodes that we had that they said that one of the things that they enjoyed the most was to know that I wasn't perfect. I can't remember if what it was that I opened up about, but I said that I had struggled with something. And someone was being serious when they said, like, he just seems like he's got it all figured out and everything's, you know, on pace for him. And he doesn't really have much going on in his life that he struggles with. And it's kind of reassuring to know that he struggles like us, quote, normal people, and has a little bit of difficulty, just to know that he's a little bit more relatable. And I remember
Yeah.
thinking that, and that was like when someone told you that, and then you relayed that message to me, I felt really bad because then I thought about what's my transparency level like? Like what type of character am I portraying to these people that they think that everything in my life is perfect? Because I mean, I would be the first to admit that nothing in my life is even remotely perfect. You know, it's like
Right.
constantly struggling on a day to day, just like everybody else. So then I kind of thought about, again, my transparency level, like how forthright am I with people? How open am I with people? What type of picture am I painting? Because obviously I might need to do some adjusting or kind of reintroduce myself in a sense to these people to show them like, hey, I'm not the perfect person that you think that I am, nor have I ever claimed to be. But just the fact that that selective filter, that personal filter that I was kind of putting on for people, and it wasn't intentional. Obviously, I don't try to do that, but the fact that I was providing them with this filter into my life that made everything seem like picturesque and utopian. That wasn't my intention at all. So then it's like, okay, maybe I need to do just a better job of sharing some of the crap that I go through or the struggles that I have or whatever.
You know, and that's the hardest thing to do, you know, and especially in today's world, because we're like we talked about already, it's, you know, so easy to come through and only show people, you know, outside of your family, and even then your family. But it's so easy to come through and only show the good that it's hard to show the bad. You know, that is the hard stuff. Like when we talk about uncomfortability, all the time. That is the epitome of being uncomfortable, is being able to be honest and say, yeah, I'm not perfect. I don't have it figured out. I'm figuring it out.
Yeah.
Like,
How many times have we said that that's the whole point of the podcast? The point of the podcast.
yeah, the day I figure it all out, we're not doing this anymore.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
I would love
because it's pointless.
I would love to continue to tell people this message till the end of time, no matter how many times we reiterate this and clarify that you and I started this podcast because of how imperfect we were and to a degree unsuccessful we were relative to what we thought our potential held. So we wanted to try to figure out ways to be more successful, talk these things out, have a little bit of relatability with people, have a little bit of accountability by putting our problems out there for other people to see. And then probably chiefly you and I having dialogue with people that are a lot higher level than us, like some of our guests or all of our guests for that matter, and trying to get them to give us tips and helpful hints and kind of learn the ropes, so to speak, of success. That's why we started this podcast, is because we don't figure it out, or we haven't figured it out. We're trying. And you and I were really adamant about that from the beginning, is trying to not come across, the word I've used in the past is like preachy or holier than thou.
Right.
Like, hey, we know the answers to success. Because when we started off, especially with the fitness stuff, you and I always talked about just a skinny guy trying to get big and a big guy trying to get skinny.
That's it. Still to this day.
Yeah, that's still how we identify and see ourselves as. So, we don't want to bewilder the point or belittle the point that we are better than other people, because that's not the case at all. We certainly think that we're below a lot of people, which is why we try to have high level people on, just so we can learn and continue to find our path, so to speak.
Absolutely.
But yeah, man, let's go to a quick commercial break, because I feel like it's about that time. We didn't get any like training updates or life updates or anything, because I got on my soapbox there for a little bit, which you sparked unintentionally. But let's talk about the training updates and stuff, because I feel like that's we usually have pretty good organic conversation that stems from that too, right?
Yep, absolutely.
All right, so let's go to a quick commercial break, and we'll give some training and life updates when we come back.
As listeners of the Chasing Dreams podcast, we know that you demand the highest quality at all times. If you're interested in quality, look no further than Beast Mode Baking. Beast Mode Baking aims to bring the highest quality, creative, and of course delicious baked goods to your home with nationwide shipping. All orders need to be pre-ordered to ensure they're packed fresh and shipped out to you as soon as possible. Beast Mode Baking offers a flat rate of $15 for shipping due to the size and weight of the cookies and doughs. So if you're interested in Beast Mode Baking, please contact CEO Shannon Knorr. That's at SKNORR13 on Instagram, and order your delicious baked goods today, because every time you support them, you're supporting the podcast as well.
And we are back from our commercial break. All right, Justin, prior to the break, you and I probably a little bit of a lengthier discussion than we had originally hoped. We talked about education, and that kind of like forewayed into getting out of bad situations, like feeling stuck, that it's kind of on you. And then we talked a little bit about the podcast pillars and our intention behind the podcast. So kind of like a all over the board type of conversation that we had. And lo and behold, we needed to get to training updates and personal life updates, which we like to do just because, like I alluded to, that kind of foreways into some good organic conversation on our end. So how is life treating you, and what have you been up to over the course of the past week?
Well, for the last 7 days, I've had 2 swim lessons with my daughter, which have been interesting. We'll call it that. The kid is a fish. She loves the water, but boy, does she not like to listen when it comes to like what the instructor's telling me to do with her, to teach her how to swim and float and do the things. All she wants to do is climb out and jump back in, or splash and squeal and throw stuff. So it's tasking for sure, but it's been cool. It's been really fun. Worked a little in the gym in the basement, which was nice. And it has been brought to my attention that because she's doing that I have to start doing yoga. So maybe in the next 2 weeks or so, I'll get the gumption to go to a yoga class or something with her, and we'll get to talk about my embarrassness for that. So, but all in all, it's been really good. Life's really good on my end. I'm settling into this new career and enjoying the additional family time. So I'm getting more time, in the evenings, especially with my family, and getting to see my kid grow. And that was the whole concept for taking this new job and new direction. So I can't be happier.
That's awesome, man. That's really, really good. And to speak
Well,
on,
let me take that back. Let me take that back. I could be a little happier if now. So now that I've critiqued all of that, I need to figure out how to add more structured gym time, and then
yeah,
I'd be happy. The happiest.
yeah, I think that for me, I've been always the type of person that thrives in a structured environment. And I know that you can have a spontaneous personality, but I think that some degree of structure is going to benefit anyone. That even if you're a super spontaneous person, I still think there is some semblance of structure that needs to be kind of adhered to in order for you to be successful, or at least not to, well, yeah, to be successful secondarily, but primarily to be consistent, because the
Yeah.
consistency in the gym is what's going to make the progress. And you can't be consistent if there's not some structure there. At least I wouldn't be. So I definitely feel the need to be like consistent, and well, then because of that, feel the need to be like structured, or at least have some type of outline or framework for that. Because doing it haphazardly, which I can't necessarily say I've done with the gym, but I've done with other things. Like I'm trying to think of an example that would be good. Like, okay, take like running, for example. Last summer when I
Yeah.
was doing like a lot of obstacle course races, I wanted to improve my cardio. Not in terms of like fat loss cardio, like in the traditional bodybuilder fitness sense, but cardiovascular improvements in terms of performance. Like I wanted to be able to run longer, do these races, which were anywhere between a 5K and a 10 mile. So like 3 miles and 5 miles, or excuse me, 3 miles and 10 miles. So I needed to be able to have a decent amount of like cardiovascular output. Well, it was the same thing. Is I could say I wanted to do that, but I didn't allocate specific time for that. I didn't set aside, hey, 3 times a week for an hour each day, I'm going to make sure that I get this cardio training in. It was just haphazard. Like maybe I'll go on a little bit of a run. Maybe I'll do some metabolic work at the end of my workout. Maybe I'll do this. Maybe I'll do that. Well, as you would assume, it was not even remotely consistent with me. So at least
Right.
you might have a little bit of a higher chance for consistency despite having a structured like a setting, just because you enjoy it. Like, see, I didn't enjoy running. So if I don't have the framework set up for it and I don't like it, you can sure as heck bet that it's not going to get done as often as it should. At least you like lifting.
Right. I like to lift and I like to run. Um, right now, running's not liking me for some reason, but I enjoy it. So that's why I crave to have that consistency in my schedule. So now that, I've lined everything else out to the best it can be, obviously you alluded earlier of my 24-hour on call, craziness of a schedule. I still have it lined out to where I do have some pretty consistent, time. So now it's just a matter of making a couple little changes and figuring out how to, keep it in my schedule consistently.
Yep. And like we've talked
So,
about before, it doesn't need to be anything exhaustive in terms of the time you specifically give to that. Like, especially with strength training, like you can make progress. Now, it's not going to be expedited progress. It's not going to be super fast, but you could technically make progress, at least in my experience, strength training 2 or 3 times a week only. Certainly three,
right.
but even two. Now, again, that's not going to be optimal progress. Like if you want to make the most amount of progress, it needs to be higher frequency and higher volume than twice a week. But I think that if necessary, like if you had so much restriction in your life that you could only strength train twice a week, I still think you'd notice progress there.
Yeah. As long as you were smart about it, for sure.
And then as long as you, and this goes into like giving or being smart about is giving intent behind it too. Like I think
Yeah.
that's one thing that if you want to be good at anything, the consistency is important, but something that gets overlooked is the intent while you're consistently doing it. So I know people that consistently go to the gym and they look like turds because they don't have any intention behind what they're doing. Like they say they want to get bigger, But when you see them, it's just like kind of cyclical. They just go through the motions and then they go home and then they come back and then they go through the motions and they go home and they come back. So they're not really having much intensity. And sometimes that's why I use intent and not the word intensity. I mean, they're kind of synonymous in this sense. But when people think intensity, they think it means like screaming and, slapping each other around and like your typical meathead stuff, which you can have a super high degree of intent and not display that type of behavior if that's not your style. Like I know people that absolutely destroy it in the gym and don't make a peep. They have their headphones on, their hoodie up. They don't look or make eye contact. They don't make eye contact with anybody. They don't participate in conversation with anybody. They just go in and they're so balls to the wall focused that they have a super intentionally driven workout where they make tons of progress because of it. So you don't have to have like a super high intensity in the common sense of the word of what people envision, where it's like people going nuts in the gym, but you can get that just from staying focused. So regardless of where you are, you have to have intent behind what you do. So same thing. I could live 5 days a week. You could live 2 days a week. And not only do you have to be intelligent with your programming, but let's say, you and I did a similar type of program. Excuse me. Oh, see, I'm allergic to talking about less than optimal, apparently. When you and I have it, let's say you and I have two workouts that we do, workout A, workout B, and they're one's upper body, one's lower body. If I do A, B over the course of a week, so I'm getting the upper body workout twice and I'm getting the lower body twice for a total of 4 sessions, and you're just doing A, B once a week. So I'm lifting 4 times a week, you're lifting twice. You would think that obviously I would make more progress, right? But if I'm just clichély going through the motions and I'm just kind of going about my business and doing my lifts and not really giving much effort in terms of holding myself accountable for what weights I'm using, holding myself accountable for technique, and I'm not really micromanaging everything. I'm just like kind of going through the workout, not thinking, okay, I need to focus on this set. No, smaller. Okay, I need to focus on this rep. No, smaller. I need to focus on just the contraction of this rep and then the stretch of this rep or whatever, because you can kind of dig deeper and deeper with that fine-tooth comb that we talked about earlier. So if you have more intention than I do and your 2 workouts are a lot more high intensity than my 4 workouts, then you're probably going to make more progress than I am. So it goes back to like we say with everything, at least I think that it does, is quality over quantity.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And I use that in my work life too. Personal life, work life, everywhere. Quality over quantity. I don't want participation. I want active participation.
Yeah, for sure.
And in everything. I don't want, and I've used one of your phrases. I don't want to create robots, especially at work. I don't want to create robots that do what I want, so I don't yell at them, and I don't ever yell. I want to be clear. Something I pride myself on, but I'm not, getting after them on something. So they just do what I ask, but I want them to do what I ask because what I ask is what they should do, what they want to do. They just don't know that they want it.
Yep. It's the same thing with coaching. Don't do this because you think it looks good to me. Do this because it's going to look good for you. You're going to benefit from doing this work or whatever it is.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that that's important, is thinking of quality of work and over quantity of work, obviously. But when you think about it, like, so this is where we get to the point in the podcast as we near the end where we start to talk about like actionable steps and all that stuff. How do you get someone to give more intent or be more conscientious of intent behind what they're doing? So like everything, like lifting, how do you get someone to focus more and be a micromanager and don't think about the workout as a whole? Think about the exercise and then break it down. Don't think about the exercise you're doing. Think about the set that you got coming up next. And don't think about the set. Think about every individual rep as having purpose. How do you get someone to have more intention behind what they're doing?
So for me, it's this is going to be a little contradicting to what I just said, because it starts with participation. It starts with going through the motions, especially if you're dealing with somebody that's never done it. So if you're talk about, the health and safety world. If you're dealing with somebody that's never done a job safety analysis or a job hazard analysis, getting them to just complete the document.
Yep.
consistently. And then once they've got to a point where they have completed been consistent for a week or 2 or 3 or 4 days or whatever your time period that you feel is okay, they've established some consistency. Now dive in deeper and have a conversation with them. Okay, do you know why? Why are we bench pressing? What is the purpose?
Yeah.
And then have that exchange.
So what if you have someone, I'm going to play devil's advocate and kind of for entertainment purposes, spin that a little bit. Let's say that you have someone that has been going through the motions, but they've been doing it entirely for too long. So now they're to the point where that habit of going through the motions, they're consistent, but they're consistently mediocre. How do you start to break them of that? Because one of the things that I think that people need to do, in my opinion and in my experience, is they need to do soul searching over what it is that they're doing. So if
I mean, that's kind of what I was thinking is the why. Why is this the thing you're doing?
Yeah, for sure. Because I think that some people do things for not only the wrong reasons, but sometimes they do things for no reasons. So like the gym, we always reference as being something that takes too long and requires way too much of your time to not be getting something from it. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean in terms of progress, because some people go to the gym for social aspect or just because it makes them like feel good. They don't have to get a super high quality workout. They just like moving and feeling somewhat productive. Where if that's you, that's fine. You're still getting something from it. But if you feel like either mentally, physically, emotionally, or spiritually that you're not getting something from something, then why are you doing what that something is? Like, why not just change course? It's like the teaching thing. If you don't like education or you're envious of educators, get out of it or get into it. You have the power to change what you're doing. Some people just kind of get caught up in doing it because they think that it's cool. Like, I've had friends that, have tried working out, but they don't like it. They've tried lifting weights because I did it and they thought that they might like it. And then pretty soon they realize that they don't like it and they get out, which is awesome because, okay, I'm not going to dedicate a lot of time and effort to this because it's not really my thing.
Right. So I think the actionable step is if you're doing something continuously because it's what you've always done, take a second and pause, not saying stop doing it, but pause and think about the why. Why are you doing it? Is there a purpose behind it? Is it something that you need to do? If it's not, find a reason why. If it's something that you should do, but you don't know why you're doing it, find out why, figure it out, dig deep. Like you said, soul search, figure out why, give yourself a purpose, because then if you have a purpose, you have a direction. If you have a direction, you have a goal.
Yep. I think it boils down to like what's providing value. So if you're doing something that's not providing value, then that why becomes so much more imperative. Like if you don't think that you're getting anything from this, then why do it? Don't do it because you think that it looks good and because other people want you to do it. You really, as corny as it sounds, you really need to be in it for yourself at the end of the day.
Ironically enough, I don't even think it sounds corny because, this is going to go way back to early episodes, in the first 50, where I talked a lot about being selfish. You need to be selfish. You need to do things for you, because if we do everything for everybody else, when does you benefit from that?
Now, you and I kind of talked very, very briefly before we started recording, and we actually curtailed that conversation and cut a little bit short about helping others. And that was kind of a very, very convoluted discussion that I was hoping we would get into, but in the essence of time, we're not going to. So I want to curtail that conversation until a later date, but I definitely want to make sure that it's one of the things we come back to, because I have a lot to say on that topic. And I feel like you and I can do a lot of, that's one thing that I have enough experience where I feel like we can help teach people and help offer some insight.
Yeah, me too.
That sort of thing. So
me too, 100%.
Make sure either, and I say this both Justin to you and the listeners, make sure that you remind me of this next episode, and I will try to remember to remind you to do the same. So that way we can touch base on this, because I think that it's going to be a really, really good talking point about helping others. And, selfish mentality is important sometimes. We've talked about it before, but not quite in the context that I think that we're going to take that conversation.
I agree.
All right. So with that, we
I
have
absolutely
come to
agree.
the end of another episode of the Chasing Dreams podcast with Charlie and Justin. This has been episode 141. And as always, we appreciate your listenership and we look forward to hearing back from you guys next week.
Unbreakable, unstoppable, I'm pushed to the edge.